child who survived, who isn't scared to paint, and who isn't scared to fly, who's got the heart of a lion in the beautiful mind. This is a poem for the dog.
Hey guys, in this video I'm going to teach you the basic fundamentals of fluid art and acrylic pouring. I hope to share in this video a couple tips and tricks, some of the products we use, and to answer some of the questions that I've been getting in my inbox. I'm hoping that this mini starter tutorial will help in our further tutorials when we start getting a little more of an advanced technique. So to clarify some of the questions that I've been getting in my inbox, I think it's super important to go over some of the fundamentals of fluid art and acrylic pouring. So basic fluid art and acrylic pouring seems, it seems super affordable in your head until you start doing it. And I promise you, when you start feeling the taste of inner stillness, you're not going to want to stop. So in order for you not to break your bank, and we're going to keep this an affordable craft, we are starving artists, we're going to go over some of the basic things that we need. So in your mind you think, okay, paint, great, okay, well, how many paints are there? There's a ton of paints. Like, okay, well, what paint aisle do I go in? Because, there's different aisles for that too. And you can just go on forever with acrylic paints. I'm going to say the simple answer is acrylic, period. So now that you got paint, well, then you need a pouring medium. So, okay, well, I have a bunch of pouring mediums, but now I also need something, to prime my canvas, but then I forgot the canvas. So, well, I'm going to need a canvas, and I'm going to need stuff to stir with, and I'm going to need plastic. I'm going to need plastic to cover things with, and you can see what I mean by it gets super out of control. So, without further ado, let's narrow this down, let's figure it out, and let's get us somewhere that we can start pouring and we can feel good about it. We don't feel like we're breaking the bank. We can make it a little affordable. The primary thing that you need is acrylic paint. So we're going to start there. There are two types of acrylic paint as far as quality. So in quality acrylic paint, you're looking at a couple different kinds. So for instance, these four, which I have Nicole's Craft Studio, and I have Craft Smart, and I have Folk Art, and Apple Barrel. These are all considered craft paints, and they're kind of the lower brand paints. Beginners, you want to start here. It's going to take a lot of paint to start acrylic pouring. You are not going to want to stop once you start. So make sure you have a lot of space, make sure you have a lot of paint, make sure it's affordable until you know what you're doing, you feel like you got a handle on it. And then you can kind of work up in the ranks. So, excuse me, after, your craft paint, you kind of work up towards like student paint is what I call it. So anything from like your AC Moore or your Michaels, your Artist Lofts, and your Premier, those are going to be the middle in between. And then you have higher qualities like Liquitex and Arteza. So those are going to be more of the artist grade. Those are more professional. Those are going to be when you got a handle on it, you're pouring every day, you're getting what you want. I hate when I spend a lot of money on things and then I don't get the result that I want in the end. I feel like, well, I just poured all this paint down the drain. Not technically, don't pour your paint down the drain. Bad idea. That's in a later tutorial. But anyway, back to your acrylic paints. So quality, you have craft, student, artist, and that's kind of where you want to start. So if you're beginning, you're intermediate, you're advanced. You can kind of break it up that way. The next thing you want to look at is consistency. So most of these are, softer bodied paints. Heavier bodied paints are a little thicker, a lot thicker. And then you have a fluid acrylic, which is, more like an ink. So I have a Liquitex and a Rowney, so those can get added, but they're all acrylics, and that's what's important. So, acrylic pouring, acrylic paint makes sense. Like I said, just beginning, you want to start with your craft paints. So like I said, you have your crafts, so that's folk art, Apple Barrel, Craftsmart, Nicole. Your student is Premier, Artist Loft, and then your higher scales like Golden, Liquitex, Arteza. These are just happen to be ones that are on my table. And you know, the inks are more higher quality, but anybody can use these. I would just say if you're trying to be budget friendly and you want to make this an affordable way to kind of get away for yourself, cheaper is just as good as more expensive. It honestly doesn't matter as long as it's acrylic. I mix all my paints anyway, and so I kind of play in the realm of everywhere because I like to just not have boundaries, and that's how everybody should be. So that's as far as, you know, your qualities and your types, but there's also other things that you need to pay attention to with your paints. And so one of the biggest things is not so much in craft paints. You're not going to find this in craft paints no matter how hard you look. So we're going to focus more on, you know, some of the student ones have them, but more on the upper scale paints. You want to pay attention to something called light fastness, and that's the permeance. That's how, you know, how much the color actually gets absorbed and how bright it stays. So if you look at the back of these bottles, okay, so right here. So at the bottom you have light fastness, and it will give it a grade. And so if you look at the written portion of this tutorial, you'll see the symbols, and you'll notice that they're labeled with a standard. And so 1's excellent, 2 is good, 3 is not sufficient. So you want to kind of stay away from 3. And then there's a manufacturing standard, and so those symbols are in the written tutorial to kind of, you know, code your way through what your light fastness is. If you want a 1, that's going to be your most vibrant paint. I always get, why are your paints so vibrant? It's because I play with the light fastness, and you should too. So you can read more about that in the written portion of this. The next part that you want to pay special attention to is whether your paints are opaque or transparent or semi-opaque. Super important. So Arteza on here has it somewhere. Or maybe they don't. Okay, Arteza, you should put this on your packaging. Or maybe I'm just missing it. Okay, well, I know for sure it's on Liquitex. So if you come to Liquitex, and I have in my hand fluorescent red and brilliant blue. So if you look on the back of these, you have transparent and you have opaque. Opaque means light doesn't go through it, it's dark. Transparent means you're going to see the paint underneath it. So by playing with the variations of semi-opaque and opaque and transparent, you get different variations in your paint as well. And so that's important to keep in mind when you're layering your paints, because opaques will usually react with your translucents and they cause them to sink or rise, and they tend to, you know, have a variation of, you know, the opaque, the semi-opaque. I try to be mindful of that. Sometimes I'm not. It's not always important, but if you're finding that you're running into muddy pores or you're not getting definitive lines, it's most likely because you have too many of one, too many opaque colors, too many translucent colors. That's really a thing. So if you're using artist paint, check what your opaque and your transparent is, check what your light fastness is. Again, those symbols are on the written portion of this tutorial that got emailed to you. So that might help with, you know, some of your pores and some of your layering, and, you know, that should hopefully clear up some of the paint questions. What kind of paint? Acrylic paint. Where do I start? Craft paint. If you don't have an artist background, it's, you know, budget friendly. You can get them on a coupon. They're on sale at the art store. Art stores are always running, you know, coupons. I'm the coupon queen at the art store. So that's kind of, you know, your base of, you know, your pores is your paint. And so technically, as long as it's acrylic, it works. Some of them you have to work a little harder at to get the consistency that you want. Others you don't. So the next important thing, So you have your paint. Now you need to make your paint pourable. So some type of pouring medium. I only happen to have Floetrol. Some people use glue. They say PVA glue, which I think is like Europe maybe, but United States it's glue all. It's not school glue. Not the same. Like children can use school glue. Glue all is like dangerous. But I find that glue is a little more on the acidy side, so it sometimes also has a reaction to your paint. Liquitex also puts out a pouring medium. Golden puts out a pouring medium. You name it. I stick to my Floetrol, and you can find these on Lowe's and Home Depot. I usually have a bigger one, but for camera's sake, I have the little one right now. And honestly, your pouring medium is got to be, you know, higher quality than your paint. You have to pick a good one. Like, I wouldn't mix glue all with craft paint because now you're low quality. If you're going to use craft paint, use something that's more reliable. Use something, you know, that's a better product if you want to go that route. Because honestly, your pouring medium is going to be everything about your painting. So, like I said, Liquitex comes out with a pouring medium. The Golden product, I think, is GAC 800. I use the Floetrol, and pouring mediums are, they're not paint thinners. People call them paint thinners. No, paint thinner is something that you, like, clean your paintbrushes with. Again, I'm self-taught. I'm not really an artist. I know how to fluid pour. I don't know how to really paint. But this thins paint, but meaning pourable, like water consistency, without using water. So a good pouring medium will keep your color, and it will keep your consistency, but it will not keep your consistency, it will keep it watery, but it'll keep the color, it'll keep the vibrancy, it'll keep the integrity of your paint because it's not messing with the binders that are mixed with acrylic paint. So that's a little on the thicker side. It's been sitting here. So pretty much what you want is, I've also seen others use water. However, I've never had really big luck with water because it doesn't completely bind with the paint again, so it results in uneven consistency. And with water, you may find that your paints are flaking or lifting off of your canvas when they dry. Your layers won't stick together. So I've always run into mayhem with water. Floetrol is my go-to. If you're going to be taking my upcoming tutorials, this is going to be my main pouring medium. I probably won't use anything else to mix my paints with. So if you're interested in how I mix my paints or how I pour my my pieces, Floetrol is the way I'm going to go. So if you're going to follow me, then you might want to go that way too. And I usually add more pouring medium than I do water. I hardly ever use water. A good pouring medium should get you to the consistency that you need without using water, or very minimal water. Where is my water? Actually, hold on. Totally unprepared, but if you're going to use water, use distilled water. Why? Why can't I use spring water? Why can't I use faucet water? Your paints already have pigments in them. They have minerals. That's what dyes them. So when you start adding water from your faucet or, you know, Poland spring water, those have minerals too, and now you're messing with your weights of your paint. It won't be the same. Distilled water is going to be what gives you less reaction to your paint, and it's not going to cause any craziness. If you add too much water, you're going to find that when it dries unevenly and it cracks. So distilled water is always my go-to if I do have to add water. I find that heavier bodied paints sometimes need a little TLC, and in that case I'll add a little water to kind of thin it out because I'm like, oh man, I've added a lot of pouring medium and I don't think that I can go anymore. So it's an intuitive thing. I don't measure, I go by consistency, and there'll be a future tutorial on, you know, how I mix, what my consistency is, what I'm looking for. This isn't real consistency, it's been sitting here, but you can see that my colors are there, you know, it didn't fade, or it doesn't fade when it dries. So it retains the color really well. So the next big question is, how do you make your cells? So additives. So additives can be anything from treadmill belt lubricant, I use Spot On, which I don't have on me right now. But one of the ones I tend to lean towards is coconut milk, which is a hair serum. This one's made by OGX. I got it at Target. I usually pump it in a smaller bottle. This is an old fluid acrylic container, and it's easier to make drips with this than it is trying to pump it out of there, because I like to be super precise with my oil. A lot goes a long way, like no joke. That was one thing I couldn't understand. I'm like, oh, more oil, more cells. No, it doesn't work that way. Opposite, think opposite. Other things I've had luck with in the past is WD-40. If you have it on hand, make sure it has silicone in it. The 3-in-1 with the silicone, this is less effective than all the other brands, but this is usually my go-to, is the coconut milk or the treadmill built lubricant, which is Spot On. You can get it on Amazon. I don't have one handy at the moment, so OGX is the way to go. So that's usually what I do a lot of my pours with. If I'm doing chameleon cells, that is with Spot On lubricant. So like I said, you can get that on Amazon. Other things that people have used are blaster spray or liquid wrench, Rain-X. I've had those in the past, but I tend to just, I found one that I liked. I stuck with it. It works. I know how to work with it, and that's what you should do too. Find the materials that work with you. Find the ones that, give you the consistency, give you the final result that you're looking for in your pours, and, baby those, nurture them, stick with them. That's perfect. And so the next thing is, how do you prepare a surface? What is your surface? What am I going to paint on? So, in the past, you've seen me paint on wood or ceramic. I've also painted on canvas. All of these are going to have to be leveled. I can't stress that enough. Your table level, your piece level, the slightest angle will throw a fluid pour right off. Believe me, I've had beautiful pieces slowly drip where you think, oh, it's a drip. No, it's a stream. By the morning, it's halfway off your table. So make sure they're level, because that's super important. As far as canvas goes, so let me bring my canvas back. Canvas. I always gesso my canvases. Always, always, always. I always get the question, do you gesso if your canvases are pre-gessoed? Yes, I gesso and then I gesso again. Gesso is what's going to give your canvas grip, and that's what's going to get your acrylic to stay. So prime. I always do a bunch at a time so that I'm not always pulling it out, because it kind of can be a hassle when you're wanting to pour and you don't have one ready. So I do a bunch of different sizes at a time, so that way it's that way it's ready. Liquitex gesso and the white is what I use, and it's super simple to put on. I just put it on with a brush. It's thick, it's white, it's primer, it's great. For beginners, I suggest that you buy canvases in bulk pack, because you're gonna go through them like crazy, and so that's an affordable way to get your pouring addiction out but not break the bank. So think about buying your canvases in bulk, because that could save some money. I always tape the back of my pieces of everything, whether it's wood or ceramic or canvas, with painter's tape. And so I always put the tape around the edges. That will stay on till finishing, whether it's top coat with a varnish or it's a ceramic piece and it's going to get resined. My painter's tape will stay on there until the piece is completely done. So that's something super important. If you like messy backs and you're like, gung-ho, I've been here, that's completely fine too. I'm just super OCD, and it's just the way I do it. And it makes it easier for cleanup after you've finished, and it's just the clean edge. So that's great. I don't have to prime or prep ceramic, But what I do is I wash it with some Windex before I pour on it, just to make sure that the surface is clean. But you don't have to gesso it, you don't have to, you know, seal it, nothing will happen to it. You can pour right on it, just make sure the surface is clean with something. Wood, when you pour on wood, super important. Make sure that you seal it. I usually seal it with GAC 800. When I first started, I started with Mod Podge, which worked actually just as well. It was this one with the mat for sealing. That it was good for the beginner. So if you're a beginner, you don't have to buy super expensive golden stuff at the moment until you get comfortable with where you're at. Mod Podge will work all right. You just want to put on probably 2 to 3 thin layers with like a foam brush. GAC 800 would be the same. I apply that with a foam brush, and I usually do a minimum of 2 coats. And then sometimes depending on how the wood feels, if it feels like it's sticking up, I'll lightly sand it in between coats. And I also tape the backs of my wood too. So I tape everything, I level everything, and you know, that's some stuff that you can start with to pour on. People also pour on wood panels. I pour on tree rounds. I mean, you can be super inventive with whatever you pour on, and I hope I get to see some great stuff. But yeah, so that's pretty much the fundamentals of, you know, products. What do I choose? Where do I choose? It's going to be all personal preference. Your mix is almost like your DNA, and the products that you use for it are those little components that make it unique. No 2 artists' mix are the same. I don't care how many times you try to replicate somebody's mix, it's never going to be the same. And so we should stop trying to strive to be like everybody else and find our own knack. Maybe our pores are a little looser, maybe our pores are a little thicker. Like, that's what makes art. So be totally fluid with it, and you know, while you're doing it, let go, and you know, have fun with it, make a mess, do what you got to do, and don't be so hard on yourself. Most of my, you know, surprising pours were do-overs. Don't be afraid to junk a canvas, except I do say wait until it's dry, because I realize that is a thing. Once it's dry, it can change, and you might love it. And if not, then you just sew over it and you re-pour. Like, not a huge deal. So, you know, there's no loss. The next thing I want to go over is, you know, how do you start pouring? So, first of all, I always say keep a journal. Keep a journal. I actually have a journal. Let me show you my journal. I'm so freaking freaked out, right? So everything that I've ever done, every recipe, every change, every adjustment, every test, everything I've ever done is written. You write yours too, and you'll be where I'm at someday. This is like my little Bible. I go back to it. You'll never be able to replicate anything. The only thing you want to replicate is your consistency and your recipe. You'll never replicate a pour, ever. It won't happen. So let go of perfection in that way, and realize that this is a very unperfect, perfect art for anybody who even doesn't have artistic talent. Can you believe it? So, as far as basic mixing, you know, you have some pouring medium and you have some paint. Make sure that you get yourself some sticks, are always great. I always love various sizes of cups, depending on what you're pouring or how you're pouring. They're always great to have on hand. And you're also going to want, I use, these are like chili cups. They're the solo cups. I use those to put my tiles on. You'll see them in my video. Because the edges, it's easier for the paint to roll off the edges. So that's another cup trick. The other thing I suggest is, if you're just starting to, I still use them, I love them, getting different size squeeze bottles, because that'll give you a little extra control over, you know, where you're putting your paint, how you're putting your paint, until you get used to it. But it's also good if you're doing more detailed work that I sometimes do. So that is the tubes. And so what I always tell people to do is start off with 1-to-1. So if you're using 1 ounce of paint, use 1 ounce of Floetrol. And gauge from there. Add more pouring medium than you do paint. And you want the consistency to almost be like a warm honey. That's kind of how I explain it because I don't measure, so it's hard. But I don't add water either. So if you're using half and half, and then you keep adding pouring medium until you get to a point where it would be almost like water. You don't want it soupy. You want it to still have some, you know, girth to it. But that's kind of how I mix as far as when I tell people or how I tell people that they should try to start troubleshooting their recipes. I always start, you know, and I'm just giving 1 ounce as an example, but 1 ounce of paint, 1 ounce of pouring medium. Some paints are going to be a little thicker, some are going to be a little thinner, and that's where you have to gauge and use intuition and kind of feel it out with your hand. And, you know, maybe you pour it into another cup and see how it's pouring. Get used to how it flows, and you'll get used to, once you practice enough, you'll totally get used to your own mix. And like I said, there'll be a tutorial coming up that's more in depth about, you know, how I mix and how I add my additives and, you know, pouring and stuff like that. If you do have a stubborn mix, again, you can add distilled water if you really have to. I would start with probably a half a teaspoon and mix and keep doing that until you get to a consistency, but I wouldn't technically add a lot of water because that really does mess with the binders and the paint, and it'll wreak havoc, and you'll wonder why you don't get cells, and that's probably why. Oh, the other thing that I had a mind blank for a second. I knew I wanted to tell you something else. When you're mixing, don't mix super fast. Like, when I mix, you know, I mix thoroughly, but I'm not, like, trying to, like, get it all worked up. You don't want air bubbles, which is why I usually let my paints sit for a minimum of 15 minutes before I pour. Sometimes it's hours. You can let paint, if it's covered, sit for a few days. So don't think you have to pour it right away. It's more of you just wanting to pour right away. And notice that, because that will be something to take into account when you're mixing. Maybe you want to mix, you know, a couple of pours at once so that you have them ready, you know, back to back or something like that. So these are the products. Most of them you can get super local. Most of them are super affordable. Another thing I recommend getting is a color wheel. I use it all the time to do my mixing. People think I'm crazy, but it really does work. Another great thing people see me always use, this one's a little messy, is my Your Kitchen torch. Make sure you get butane with it, because you can't light it without butane. Mine actually has this nifty little window to tell me where the gauge is, which is very convenient. And honestly, they just fill right from the bottom. Put it together, and you're good to go. You got flame. They have a safety on them, so I'd still keep them out of the way of children, but they do have a safety on them. And then the plastic that I use, that everybody sees me, it's just honestly, like, I don't know, this is like, I get whatever's on sale on Amazon. I just make sure that it's usually like 1 ml at least, and it's 9 feet by 12 feet, so I cut it into sections, and that's an affordable way to cover surfaces that you're going to be pouring on to protect them. You don't want to be pouring on your kitchen table unless you have sufficient privilege to do that. I do want to pour on my kitchen table, but I technically don't have my own table, so I haven't been able to do that yet. So the next thing I'm going to get ready for is to show you how to start pouring with just a basic flip cup, and how you want to layer it, and a super easy way to get some cells, and we'll try that. And then hopefully, you know, the writing part of this tutorial you'll also be able to refer back to in case I missed anything on my disastrous desk. And again, This guy for life. These are lifesavers. It prevents you from adding too much oil weighing down your paint. Yes, I do mix my oil in, but only enough to get it to the bottom of the cup. I don't rigorously mix it. It's nothing crazy. Make sure you have plenty of rubber gloves and paper towels, and you should be all set to pour. Like I said, the next pour that I'm going to do is going to be a simple flip cup with simple cells. Hopefully anybody can do it, using any type of paint, and we'll kind of walk through that together. So I'll see you in a few.
Seems like the more time passes, the less I know. People will change, there will be pain. These winds will blow.